Okay.
Okay.
All right, cool. So, hey everybody, my name is Knikki Hernandez. I'm super excited to be here with Jeaneen Tang. She actually came on my podcast, The Gentle Year. I met her and just thought she was just a doll. I mean, just an amazing mom with an incredible story, and her wisdom and the information that she shares about communication, particularly with kids and helping them to be more confident communicators. I personally found it to be incredibly profound. So, I'm super excited to have Jeaneen here. Jeaneen, if you would like to take a moment to introduce yourself before we get into some of the specifics of this information, I'd love to have you do that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nikki, for that introduction. And it was amazing being on your podcast. And I'm glad we're connecting outside of that. And hopefully this partnership will continue. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
So welcome, Jessica, and anybody else who comes on here. I'm Jeaneen Tang, speech language pathologist. I'm an author and also a mom to a special needs child. He's 13 years old. And unfortunately, when he was 13 months, sorry, he's 13 years old. And unfortunately, when he was 13 months old, he had a traumatic brain injury from falling off of the bed and had to have an emergency craniotomy. And a few days after that, the swelling in the brain caused a stroke. So all on the left side of the brain was damaged, and he still has this right side hemiparesis, which means he doesn't really use the right side of his body as well as the left. The right arm and the hand are non-functional. He's able to run and jump and everything, but he still has a lot of problems with balance. And even though he has gone through so many traumatic things, he's the most resilient child, and he's made me a better speech therapist, I think, in general. I've been doing this for 25 years now, and he's really made me understand what my clients' parents are going through and have this empathy for the people that I work with. So, he's really inspired me to create a greater impact in the world. And so I wrote a book called Play Dumb and Sabotage. And this seminar is based off of a lot of things that are on there as well. And so I wanted to share that with everybody here today, and I can't wait to get started.
Excellent. And just a quick question before we do begin the actual presentation. I think it would be helpful for the listeners to know exactly who you work with. You mentioned that your son has made you a better speech pathologist and more patient and a more compassionate person. And so I'd love to know a little bit more about the families that you do work with on a daily basis.
Absolutely. So, as a speech language pathologist, I work with actually all ages, but I specifically have this passion for early intervention, which is 0 to 3 years old. And a lot of the families that we work with are, a lot of them are first-time parents. And a lot of times we often, you know, don't know what to do as first-time parents. And so what we find is that a lot of times parents are doing too much. They're trying to over anticipate everything the child might need or want. And so by being really great parents, they're actually unknowingly inhibiting the child's natural response to, experimenting with their environment, making observations, trying to figure out how to communicate rather than being have things done for them. So a lot of these parents that I work with are, parents that have late talkers. I also work with a lot of parents who definitely have children with special needs. Like my son needed speech therapy because of a traumatic brain injury and stroke. But I work with children with autism, I work with children with cerebral palsy, with Down syndrome, intellectual disabilities across the whole gamut. So I work with a lot of different parents, and you know, just to go off a little bit off topic, I've worked with school age for many years, and I work with adults in hospitals as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you're really covering the gamut from kids that are very young to adults in hospitals to people with special needs to people who are just developing and they're late bloomers. And then you've got the whole range of intellectual abilities and disabilities really covered. It sounds like that's really amazing. Now, you did mention that as a first-time parent, parents are sometimes helping too much. They're being too good of a parent. I would love to know more of what you mean by that and what it means to be helping too much.
Absolutely. So as a first-time parent, we don't know how to take care of our babies. We go through parenting classes, we learn how to diaper the child, we learn how to give the baby a bottle, we know how to swaddle the child. If we grew up in a family with a large, large siblings, right? We have a lot of siblings. Maybe we took care of somebody who was younger, but I was the youngest child and I only had an older brother. My mom is in Hawaii and I'm in Los Angeles. So as a first-time parent, there were a lot of things I didn't know, right? So so give it an example, you don't know what you don't know. When I was breastfeeding my son at 8 weeks old, he was growing very fast and I was breastfeeding a lot. And I remember going to his breastfeeding meeting and I was exhausted. I told them, I don't know what I'm doing wrong or what else I can do, but I'm exhausted. I'm like, I'm getting him up in the middle of the night to feed him, changing his diaper, putting him back to sleep. And they're like, well, is he still pooping? And I go, no. They're like, okay, the diaper's fine. Just leave the diaper. He can pee all night. And they're like, well, can you breastfeed lying down? And I said, well, he kind of spits up. And they're like, how much does he spit up? And I kind of showed them like how much I thought he spit up. And they're like, just put an extra towel down. It'll be fine. You can actually lie down and feed the baby as they're sleeping. It's kind of a very innate way of the baby waking up, finding your boob. And they're not even awake. They're just kind of breastfeeding in their sleep in a sense. And once I learned those tips and strategies, I got so much more sleep. My son got so much more sleep because I wasn't waking him up in the middle of the night. I wasn't having to put him to bed. I was getting up, feeding him, and then laying and just falling asleep. And that was a very natural thing. And so by learning those little tips, I was a better mother and I was sleeping better myself. But as a first-time parent with language development and knowing how to interact with your child, you're not taught that. You're not taught how to do that before you take the baby home, right? So you are, watching your baby. If they're crying, you're trying to, quiet them as best as possible. Do they need a toy? Do they need a bottle? Do they need to be changed? You're trying to anticipate everything the child might need or want. And as that baby gets a little bit older, oftentimes first-time parents especially, you're doing that as they're getting older. So you're grabbing all the toys they might want, giving them all the snacks in a bowl. They don't need the whole bowl of goldfish, but you give it to them because they love goldfish or they love blueberries or whatever it is. You give them the whole bottle of milk or the whole cup of juice, whatever it is, before the child's able to ask for more. So as we're over anticipating and meeting these children's needs, before the child's able to indicate, we are being good parents because we've learned to anticipate. We've learned how to observe what the child is doing or what the child might be doing next. And we're meeting those needs before the child's even able to indicate that I'm hungry. I need something to play with. I want to play with that. So they're pointing, right? So you're doing all these things for them before they're able to naturally learn how to interact and communicate with you.
Wow, I've got so many questions. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about first was it sounds like parents really know how to respond to their children's needs. And that's for not for all parents, but for many parents, they, they have this innate ability to respond quickly. They have this ability to respond in the best way that they know how with the information that they have. And sometimes that's for the betterment of the child. And sometimes, like in your case, it's not always for the betterment of the child. You might actually be impacting them in a negative way, even though you have the best of intentions. Now, I do have a specific question about your situation with your son. In terms of sleep, how important, I know you're not a sleep expert, but how important, in your opinion, is sleep um, when it comes to language development?
That's a great question. So I was just talking to one of my clients. He's going to be in fourth grade right now. And I was talking to him about sleep because he was saying, his routine of the day. And I said, do you know what happens when you sleep? That's when your brain actually cleans itself and your body grows. So when you are sleeping is the only time where your brain actually flushes out all the toxins that it's accumulated throughout the day. And that's when your brain grows, your body grows. So sleep is very, very important for a child, for everybody, but especially for the baby, right? The baby that's going to a toddler, that's going to a child. My son is 13 years old. He's an adolescent and he needs a lot of sleep because he's growing quite a bit, and his brain needs to continue to grow. And not so much we're saying growing in size, but growing in the ability to repair itself in order to learn things. And as a baby, you want that child to be able to sleep peacefully. You want the baby to, you know, have a good night's sleep. You want them to sleep 10, 12 hours a night, when they're first a baby. And, di people have different beliefs on how a baby should be sleeping. We co-slept with our son, and he slept through the night, and I never had a problem with him waking up in the middle of the night at all. But so I know some people want to sleep train their babies, and that's up to them. That's their parenting style. But sleep overall is very important for the growth of the brain and to learn language. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Can you provide us with an example of a parent, perhaps one that you've worked with, who was helping their child too much and over anticipating the child's needs as far as language development and how that may have impacted the child and potentially how you helped the parent navigate that situation?
Absolutely. That's a really good question. And I think during the time of COVID too, especially, we were taking care of these babies. These babies were born during COVID. And a lot of times I saw parents, and it's not only during COVID, but especially during COVID when, you want to make sure your child's health is the best and you're taking care of your baby. But I had a client who was born during COVID, and because the parents were home all the time, they were tending to the baby. They were meeting all of his needs, and he appeared to understand everything, right? The parents would say something, and the child would do, like, oh, go get your shoes, and he would go get his shoes. And then he would, they would give a direction or ask him to point to something, and he would do that. But he was not verbally communicating because they weren't actually having a conversation with him, right? They were saying things to him, they were doing things with him, doing things for him, but not actually exchanging vocalizations or for words or gestures and having him communicate back. And so when he started speech therapy, literally the only sound I had heard him make at his preschool was this, it sound of enjoyment when he was eating his lunch. He would just be like, he'd be enjoying, we just knew he enjoyed his lunch. But other than that, he would not say a word. But he appeared to understand everything. He could follow directions. In the classroom, he was following routines. And a lot of times, those kids who understand well and are physically developed, right? They can run and jump and climb just like their other peers. Those kids are what we call late talkers, right? And we can catch those kids up usually quite quickly, unless there's some other underlying thing, like maybe apraxia of speech, which is something completely different that we can talk about later if you want. But apraxia of speech would be like the child knows what they want to say, but they just can't actually form the sounds. It's this disconnect between the brain and the actual movement. But for the child who understands everything, physically sound, and appears to be otherwise normal, they usually will be able to catch up quite a bit. And it's a lot of parent training rather than just child therapy, because you want to be able to train the parent to anticipate but step back, right? So in my book, I say mindfully under anticipate. So I want to anticipate, but you want to step back and mindfully let that child figure it out in a sense. Yes,
Exactly. I do have
absolutely.
your book. I love it. It's amazing. Now, as far as the training itself, can you tell us what parents should be doing on a daily basis at, let's say, the earliest possible level of a child's development, so in their early years, and then how that kind of needs to shift specifically as the child moves into toddlerhood and a place at an age in life where they should be able to communicate needs. And then can you also talk to us about some potential red flags, just like you did with the other child who was only sort of making this grumbling noise at lunch when he was eating? Can you talk to us about some red flags that parents should be looking for and also the specific things that parents should be doing at an early age?
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about what parents should be doing at an early age, right? So I think that it's not, never too early to talk with your child, to sing with your child, to read to your child. We played music when my son was in my womb, and he would move. His body would move to that music. Like he would hear the sound, and his legs would kick or something, and we could feel his interaction with that sound, right? Because he can hear something and interact with that. So it's never too early to get down right next to your baby, talk to your baby, try and make eye contact with your baby, make gestures, right? You want to have movement with your hands, facial expressions with your face, and different intonations with your voice. So it's never too early to do any of that. And as your baby gets a little bit older and they can, touch things or point to things, you can do what they call hand over hand. So when you're looking at a board book, a book that's made out of very durable pages, right? So you can hand over hand show them how to turn the page, right? And then eventually scaffold that so they can actually turn the page by themselves, right? So you turn the page and then they do it following some directions and then eventually pointing to different pictures, like, where's the dog? And the dog says, and you can give a little pause and then you can make the dog sound and see if they can imitate that. So all those interactions when they're babies, like first babies till they're toddlers, you want to be able to you want to scaffold, what we call it, scaffold that. So you do as much as you have to, right? So you have to do all the talking when they're little. You have to do all the sounds and everything. And once they start babbling, then you have this vocal, what we call vocal play. So you say something, they might say something, and then whatever they say, you say that back and you build upon it. And those aren't actually words, right? They're not like saying like, "Oh, mom, ball," whatever. They're saying like, "Ooh, gaga, ooga," and you say, "Oh, la, lu, ba, da, ba, blue," and then you can make a facial expression and they think that's so entertaining, right? They are geared to look at your face and they're hearing these sounds and they think it's so funny. And from there, when they're toddlers, when they're 1 years old, you should expect them to say their first real word. So around 12 months old is when you're going to typically see their first real word. So a real word is a word that they can say consistently for a specific thing, whether it's mom or dad or ball or car or bubbles, whatever it is, they're able to say that word over and over again for that specific thing. And then as they're getting a little bit older, you're going to hear them combine two words. So by the time they're 2 years old, they should be saying at least two words together, like more bubbles or mommy up. And by age 3, you would expect them to say at least 3 words, 3 to 5 words, like in a short sentence or in a short question. And so if you're a parent who does not hear your child babbling, when they're younger, before 9 months old, between 4 and 9 months, if you're not hearing them babble and make that vocal play, you really want to see, is there a problem with their hearing? Is there something else that's going on neurologically? Are they not able to see visually? I had a girl who she was very farsighted, and they didn't realize that she was so farsighted until she was after 2 years old. And so she didn't get her glasses, her first set of glasses, until she was 2.5 years old. And once she got her glasses, the world opened up, right? So if there is any kind of verbal or language delay in understanding or in expression, you want to see, is there something else going on that is impacting their senses, whether it be hearing or vision? Do they have sometimes kids have a difficult time moving their tongue. Are they tongue-tied? Do they need to have an oral motor exam to see if their mouth is able to move and eat and everything? So if your child is not able to eat solid foods at whatever that particular stage is, right? At 1 years old, 1.5 years old, if they're not able to chew well, is there a problem with their oral motor, their jaws, their teeth, their tongue? So you want to look at all kinds of things in that realm as well.
I love that. So basically, when you mention having a conversation with your child, you don't necessarily mean like what we would equate to having an adult conversation with your child. When you're having a conversation with a child, that's really going to be specific to the age and the ability of that child. Like you might be cooing and gagaing with that child because that's the language that they can produce. Now, what I have seen with some parents is that they try to have adult conversations with their children before they're ready. And I don't mean like sexually exploitative conversations when I say adult conversations. What I mean is that sometimes they're asking questions to that child that the child is not developmentally capable of answering because they're not capable of analyzing, or they're not capable of reasoning, they're not capable of empathy when it comes to, potentially how someone else might feel. All of that comes later in a human's development. It's not just innately there in conversation. It might be innately there internally, because we've seen experiments where a baby and a child, or a very young child at that, has demonstrated a level of empathy and a sense of care for an object or a person that maybe is put in a situation that seems unjust. So that's there innately, but they may not necessarily have the linguistic processing to express what is innately there. So, can you just provide us with a clear definition of what the phrase having a conversation with your child actually looks like, and then explain to us what opportunities are available on a daily basis to enhance those conversations at a developmentally appropriate level?
Absolutely. So let me just take a sip of water real fast.
Absolutely, yes. It's hot out here where I'm sitting. I'm like, I'm sweating, but you know what? I'm all about it. It could be summertime forever for me. 90 degrees, 100% humidity, bring it on. No, go ahead.
Absolutely. So when I say have a conversation with your baby, right? So before they're even able to talk, it's really like this energy exchange of I am making a sound and making faces, and then they are observing what I'm doing, right? And so I might be saying something to them, and I might answer myself as if they were talking. So might say like, oh, look at that big doggy. Look, what is he eating? He's eating a bone, whatever it is. I might actually be doing both sides of this dialogue. And what I'm doing is I'm language bombarding this child. I'm having them hear the words, having them experience what we're seeing or interacting with. And as that child's able to start saying words as they, 1 year, 2 years old, they might not have that, what we call their utterance length, right? The how many words they're able to say, how many words they're able to be specific about, right? Whether it's a adverb, adjective, a verb, whatever it is, they might say one word back to me, but I'm going to model back to them what that longer, more specific utterance is. But I'm not going to say like full on longer, too long sentence, a sentence that is too long, because they aren't able to really understand and grasp all of those concepts yet. But if they say one or two words, I might expand upon that. I might increase that and model it back to 4 to 5 words. So we're going to have this conversation of I'm going to say something or ask a question, and they might say something back, and I'm going to model back to them what I think that is. I'm not going to say, well, you should say this, right? I'm not going to tell them or correct them in that sense, but I'm going to model it back to them. And a lot of times for my kids who are starting speech therapy, who are nonverbal, right? They might learn how to sign for more before they can say it, right? So I'm like, oh, what do you want? Do you want more bubbles? And they might sign more, like, I want more bubbles. Yeah, let's do bubbles. And then we'll do the activity, and then we'll do repetition, right? So we're going to practice that over and over, because we want to reach a level of mastery where they are comfortable doing that communication again and again. And as the child becomes more verbal, then the conversation, will be longer sentences. But if there's still this level of correction through modeling rather than you should say it this way, right? So when my son, we're working on what's it called? Verbs, right? So if he says like, oh, the man falled. The man fall down. I go, oh, the man fell down. He's like, oh, wow, that I hope he's okay. That man fell down. Right? So I slow it down just a little bit as I'm modeling it back to him. But I'm not going to say like fall. He didn't fall down. He fell down. Like I would not correct him in that way because it's not helpful and it doesn't it's not natural as well, right? So you want to correct him. I want to correct him in the best way. That's it's not I'm not reprimanding him for it. I'm just modeling it back, and then he hears the correct conversational way to produce that particular word. So as a child gets older, as we become adults, even, right? You don't learn things unless you experience them. So in order to learn higher level language, you need to be introduced to it and you need to be able to experience that and make errors when you are doing that, right? Because my son will say, he'll say some kind of word like, oh, that's, I'm jealous or you're jealous. And I go, "Mm, that's not quite the way jealous is supposed to be used. So I'm like, well, I was like, I think you mean that I am, you know, whatever it is. And so I will correct it in a natural way, but I'm like, I'm not going to say like, oh, that's the wrong word, you know. I was like, well, that's not quite correct. Let's see if you meant this. I was like, and then I might define. I'm go, jealous means such and such, and I think you meant to say this. And that's kind of the normal conversation that you would have with an adult or a young adult, young adolescent, rather than just the basic, just the basic modeling of the correctness of it. Does that make sense?
It does. I think that's so clear, and it was really a great distinction that you made between the ages of when you model the correction versus when you now evolve to actually doing some level of gentle correction to that person. I think that was great. And one of the reasons why I would say this is because there it's a personal experience. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. There's a gentleman who I know. He's in his 50s. He's in his, I think yeah, I would say he's in his 50s. He is a wonderful man. He's in no way a person who has struggled with language in any aspect of his life. He's a great communicator. But there's one thing that has always irked me when he speaks is he almost says this every other sentence. He'll say, to be blunt, to be blunt, to be blunt. And he always says that as a preface for what he is about to say. And it gets on my nerves because the word blunt means that you essentially have no control, no emotional control, and you also have no regard for another person's feelings or the way that they think or the way that they're processing information. And I know that's not what he's trying to convey because he's so caring and so compassionate, but he says to be blunt, which is so opposite of who he really is. So I never have said anything to him because I didn't want to, just quote unquote correct. But there was a moment where him and I were texting back and forth because we have a business deal going on. And so we were texting back and forth. And I had asked him a more personal question about this thing that I was doing. And I said, well, hey, how would you handle this particular situation that I am in with this other person? And it's not a bad situation or anything. It was just a simple thing where I was looking for advice from someone who's more experienced and wiser. So he prefaced his text message, even his text, with the phrase to be blunt. And he even recommended that I be quote unquote blunt with this other person. So I texted him back and I said, I don't think that's what you mean because blunt means that you don't have any regard for this other person's feelings and you have no emotional control over the situation. And I said that over text and he was like, oh, yeah, that's not what I meant. And so I don't know if I've talked to him a couple times, but I'm waiting to see over time if that word blunt sort of disappears from his natural vernacular and the way that he speaks because it's so opposite of who he is. So I would love to get your response on on that. I know it's a very personal thing, but I just thought it was really interesting in terms of navigating complex language situations with adults.
Yeah, absolutely. I would, I think sometimes people learn different phrases and it becomes a habit for them to say it, right? And they don't even really think about it sometimes, right? But I think by bringing it to his attention, like, oh, so you want to be blunt? So you think that I should do da 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 da? Like, and preface it with or explain it like, well, if I was blunt, then this would happen. Like, so do you mean that I should do that? Like, no, 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 right? It kind of play dumb, like play naive in a sense. We're like, oh, so you're saying to be blunt, and then if I do that, then this will happen. So having the causation of like, if I do this, this will happen. Is that what you mean I should do? And they'd be like, no, no, no. Oh, so you're saying, and then maybe have a different word that, so you should be, so to be whatever,
Clear,
different,
honest,
yeah, yeah, to be
transparent.
honest, to be
Yeah,
clear, yes.
I love that.
Um, so that's, yeah, so to be blunt, is probably something he's probably said forever and not, doesn't even realize he's saying it. If that, that, that,
100%.
that makes sense. Yeah. So I would,
100%.
I would love to hear a follow-up on how he does with you in the next like week or so.
I will. I will definitely keep you posted on that. And I also have a question for you in terms of working with, higher aged kids, middle school, high school range. One thing that I've noticed as a teacher and a tutor is that a lot of times students are being requested to write or communicate information that they don't personally have any experience with. As an example, if a kid is reading a book and they're asked to develop a theme, they say, well, what is the theme of this book or this chapter? A lot of kids have challenges with that because they don't have much life experience. And so developing a theme where you're connecting it to a topic or an idea is very difficult for them. And it's not because of intelligence, it's because of lack of experience. So, as an example to this, if we're talking about a character in a book who gets a second chance, gets a chance to correct a situation and to right a wrong. Well, the topic is second chances, but the theme could be something like second chances work effectively, especially when they are connected to compassion and accountability. So when you've got both, well, a 13-year-old kid is not going to come up with that. It's just not going to happen. So one of the questions that I have for you as a speech pathologist is before kids are asked to do things that are academically beyond their life experience, should we be focusing on their own life experience before we ask them to talk about themes and more advanced literary topics? Um, so, as an example, today I was tutoring a kid before this session, and instead of asking her about the themes of this novel that we've read together, I connected every single question that we did back to her personal life. So, one was trust. I said, who do you trust? So, I started with a simple question: who do you trust most? And then I said, what is something specific that they have done that has caused you to trust them? And then the next elevated question was something like, if someone gets hurt by someone who they trust, what do they need in order to be able to trust again? So it elevated from who do you trust and what have they done to earn your trust or cause you to trust them? And then what happens if a person gets hurt and they want to be able to trust, but they can't? What do they need to be able to do so? So you can see the elevation in the questions, but the questions weren't about the character. They will be eventually, but they were geared towards her first in terms so that she could process these terms like second chances and trust and things like that. Is that something that makes sense to you, or something that you would advocate for as a speech pathologist? And I know most of your experience is working with younger kids, but does that make sense as a way to get them to be able to produce more language and more linguistic complexity?
Absolutely. I love your approach to that. I love it. I love it. Love it. Because the child, like you said, they need to understand it themselves first, right? And so if you ask, it might be simplified questions, right? Based upon themselves. That's going to be able to translate over as they're learning the points of view of other characters, right? So I was going to say that you learn things from your own life experiences, but you also can gain this, what they call presuppositional ability, which means the ability to see the world from someone else's point of view. And that's where children are born into this world. They're very egocentric. Everything is in their world. Everything, this is my world. Things are happening around me. This is, I am centered, right? I'm the center of the world. And then they learn that there are other things in this world, right? Whether it's other people, other objects, and they are not the center anymore, right? And so when they are able to gain this perspective from other character points of view or other people's points of view, that's when they're really learning a lot more linguistic language from under. They also learn understanding, empathy, sympathy, perspective, right? So you want to be able to first understand it in yourself, but also when you're reading characters, you might read a character about a story about a character who, you know, is climbing a mountain, but you are like, well, I've never climbed a mountain. But if you have that presuppositional ability, then you can have this point of view and kind of experience that, right? So you have this ability to understand yourself and then have this ability to understand other people's points of view. So you don't necessarily only need to be able to experience things yourself, but you have to start there in order to gain that understanding of the rest of the world.
Yeah, agreed. That makes perfect sense. Now, before we move on, this amazing slide that you have, you say the goal isn't simply more words, it's greater communication independence. And then you have this chart, notice, think, communicate, problem solve, and then advocate. Can you explain to us what this means before we shift gears?
Absolutely. So notice means to like observe, right? If you want to be able to observe your environment and really take in what is happening, right? And then also think means to assess, right? You want to think about that. What's going on? Do I need something? Do I want something? Especially like when I work with this one kid during recess, and we're working on social interaction and social play. Like, look at your friends. Oh, look, your friend there is sitting by themselves. What do you think is going on? Oh, they look kind of sad. Should we go over and talk to them, right? So in that case there, the communication would be, are you doing okay? What's going on? Do you need something? As a little baby or a child, you might want to ask, like, oh, I'm hungry. What do I need? Oh, I like to have goldfish or apples. What is there food? And then how can I communicate what I need or want? And then the problem solving goes into like, how do I communicate? What do I need to do? And then advocating would be to be able to actually either sign or verbalize and be able to request something or ask for something. Or sometimes kids are playing in the classroom. I work with little kids, so they're playing during free time and another child comes over. They need to notice that, oh, this child is coming over, and what do they want, right? And sometimes the child is trying to come and play with them or take a toy, and they need to be able to advocate something like, I need my space, or like, you can't have my toy, or you need to ask if you want to borrow something, so um, kids need to learn how to communicate, observe, communicate, and then advocate for themselves in whichever level of communication they are at, whether they're early intervention, little kids, school age, teenagers, adults. I think everything is very much the same in how we are able to communicate throughout our day.
Wonderful. Okay, that makes perfect sense. So here you have basically a quote where you're, instead of saying this, we might say this to encourage more speech and more natural play and natural communication and all of that. So, can you help us understand what you mean by like the whole concept of playing dumb and changing our questions from being very simplistic to something where we can actually take advantage of the moment and time we have, because we've got a lot of parents that are working. They don't necessarily have a lot of time to spend with their children, or is not, maybe not as much as what would be ideal. And so how can we prepare ourselves to take advantage of the opportunities that we do have and ask better questions?
Absolutely. So the title of my book is Play Dumb and Sabotage, and play dumb means to under anticipate, mindfully under anticipate. So if you look at the subtitle, mindfully under anticipating the child's needs and creating opportunities to practice language. When you're playing dumb, you want to anticipate, but you want to step back and really observe and assess what's going on. Sabotage is all about that repetition, right? That practice. So creating opportunities to practice throughout the day. And I tell parents one of the easiest ways to start this is during snack time because children need to eat. They get hungry, right? And a lot of kids have favorite snacks, whether it be goldfish, Cheerios, it could be cut strawberries or whatever it is. When you're giving the whole bowl to the child, that communication exchange is done, right? So you give the whole bowl, you don't really need to talk to them anymore. You can comment about like, oh, your goldfish look great. Oh, yeah, you're eating it. Oh, that looks yummy. Are you going to share with me? But if you are giving them a couple goldfish and waiting for the child to then indicate that they want more, you can have the rest of the bowl in sight but out of reach. That's an opportunity for you to practice language, right? If you are like what my godson, he was 9 months old. He was not crawling. He was carried quite a bit. And I would say he was a pretty lazy baby. He would just lay there if you didn't pick him up, right? And I knew that he loved the slinky that I had. So instead of saying like, do you want the slinky or what, I know he wanted it, right? I could have just given it to him. I'm like, he liked it. He was looking at it. I could have just given it to him and that would be the end of the interaction, right? But instead of doing that, I said there is an opportunity for him to have this conversational exchange, right? So even though there's no actual words for him to say, I might be saying like, "Ooh, I like this slinky," and I might be moving it towards him, and I might be pulling it away, and then he's reaching for it now, right? And then I'm going to do that again and again until finally he started to move and wriggle across the floor because he wanted to get this slinky. This is the communication practice that I want parents to be able to have. If you're doing bubbles, you can blow bubbles and then wait and see like if the child's going to ask for more bubbles. And so throughout the day, you can find different ways to play with your child, to have snacks with your child. Eating's a great opportunity, playing is a great opportunity, but also you can uh, put something like their favorite toy inside but out of reach, where they can see it, not get to it, and be safe, like they're not going to climb up to get it. But you can wait until they indicate, they might point to it, they might they might vocalize for it, and then you can have the opportunity like, what do you want? And play dumb a little bit. Say, oh, you want that? Say, please, and you might sign for please or more, and then you can get the toy for the child, and you can have that kind of interaction. So there's great ways to functionally create opportunities to practice language with your child every day. And I'm not saying to be perfect because it's difficult to do this all the time, but the more you do it, like anything, it becomes a habit. And as a parent, you want to be able to anticipate your child's needs, but as a good parent, you might be stifling their development. So knowing what a good parent and a great parent would be, right? So a good parent is doing everything for the child. A great parent, I would say, is, knowing what the child needs, but seeing where you can meet them where they're at. You don't want to ask a child to do too much to be able to do, uh, you're not going to expect a child to walk when they can't crawl, right? You're not going to expect a child to sign for more if they've never seen it before, or say more if they've never signed for more before. So you want to meet the child where they're at, but have a understanding of ways that you can practice communication every day.
Yeah, I love that. And I also appreciate the fact that you said no one's striving for perfection here. Can't be perfect in today's world. And so that's okay for us to utilize the opportunities that we have and take advantage of them in the best way that we know how. And that's okay. No one needs to try to be perfect. I also appreciate the fact that you mentioned that there's plenty of opportunities, especially if we create them. There's lots of chances to speak with your child on a walk, especially an older child, or if you're driving, things like that. Maybe we can have a moment at the dinner table where we're eating together and discussing the day's events and all of that. I think that's a great opportunity as well. But really, it's about creating. It's about creating these opportunities, and sometimes they end up creating themselves. Like at school, when I'm working with students, there's a never ending list of opportunities in which a student will come to me and they'll want to be spoon fed. They will absolutely want to be spoon fed information or a quick answer. That instant gratification is strong. I fully am aware of that. And sometimes it's strong with me too. I just want to be like, yeah, 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 go, go, go. Like, do your thing, right? But am I utilizing these opportunities that are presented to me or that I'm creating to really help them develop the maturity and the linguistic capacity to have confidence in their communication abilities? And that's really the bigger picture item that I love. My mom, I know even at 38 years old with me, anytime I speak to her, if I say something that's kind of vague, the very first question that she always asks me is, "What do you mean by that specifically?" She will say that to me, even as an adult. So maybe that's also a tip that we can use with people, adults, and maybe some of our older learners as well. So here there's a concept that you talk about not asking yes or no questions. I love this idea. Can you kind of walk us through this transformation process of avoiding the yes and no questions?
Absolutely. So, I've been using this phrase or this rule like for most of my career, and it's really helped me. And I've hopefully have, helped other parents and teachers gain more just compliance and less behaviors with because a lot of times we ask a yes no question without even thinking about it, right? A lot of parents will say, "Are you ready to take a bath? Are you ready to do your homework? Are you ready to clean up? Are you ready to brush your teeth?" And a lot of times these kids are like, "I don't want to do any of that," right? So they have this no response, but in actuality, the parents or the teachers aren't listening to that no. They're saying, well, that wasn't more of a rhetorical question for them, right? As the giver of the question, you're like, that's a rhetorical question. I don't really want you to answer, right? That you're going to do it no matter what. And that as a child, you're not gaining, you're losing the trust of the adult because you don't want to do it, but still you're being made to do it in a sense. And so you want to give the child some autonomy. You want to be able to give the child the ability to voice their needs and wants, rather than just be told, okay, well, you don't want to do your homework, you're going to do it anyway, right? So, like, one example I always give is like my son, I have to cut his nails, right? And it's like, hey, your nails are getting long. Do you want to cut them today or tomorrow? And he'll always choose tomorrow, but he's made a choice, right? And oftentimes parents will say like, "Oh, what do you want to have for snack? Do you want an apple? No. Banana? No. Orange? No. Crackers? No." Or for dinner time, right? So it's like the parents are like, "I don't know what to make. They don't want anything I've suggested." I'm like, "Well, you can give them choices, right? Okay, so these are the choices tonight. Do you want chicken or pizza?" Right? Rather than, "Do you want chicken? No. Do you want pizza? No. These are the two things I have." Right? So um instead of "Do you need help?" It's like, "Oh, what do you need?" Right? So do you need help? Could be yes or no, right? But it could be a offering a choice as well, or an open-ended question. Um, and then also by not asking a yes, no question, you can also open up conversations, right? So if you say like, "Oh, did you have a good day?" Like, yes. Now you have to do a follow-up question, like, "Oh, what did you like about your day?" Right? Or if you say, oh, what did you learn in school today? Or what was the best thing that you did at recess? Right? You can ask these open-ended questions, but very specific in a sense, right? Instead of, do you understand? So like, tell me what you're going to do first, or teach me what we should be doing, right? Instead of, can you clean up your room? It's like, wh where do you want to start when we clean up your room? Or you can say, would you like to clean up your room or have dinner first? Or we have to clean up your room. Do you want to clean it up in 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Like if they're playing and stuff. So you want to give the child options when possible, and also provide the child with as much autonomy as possible as too, because you want them to be able to communicate and gain that trust, or the adult needs to gain the child's trust by letting the child have some autonomy and some power over their communication.
Yeah, exactly. We're not mind readers, right? So we can't expect parents and children and really anyone to read our minds and guess what we want to have to eat and, guess what we need and all those kinds of things. So it really does start, I believe, I definitely believe you. It starts with the quality of the question. And the quality of the question will elicit the quality of the response that we get. And I think that's just such a great takeaway that we can have. And then if we are asking questions like the clean your room one, do you want to clean your room? Or are you ready to clean your room? That can, in a way, create confusion in the mind of the person, because what we're really saying is, I need you to clean your room, as opposed, or some variation of that, as opposed to the choice, the illusion of choice that we're giving them. And that can create confusion for that child because we're not actually being clear with our intentions and what we're truly saying or asking of them. And I think that's a really important takeaway, that we don't want to create confusion in the mind of our child. We want to say what we genuinely mean and do so consistently so that the child doesn't feel like the message is scattered. Like, well, you said this, but you really meant this. Well, what did you mean by this when this happened and all of that? And then all of a sudden that's creating confusion, and then that can cause kids to kind of shut down. I know that as a teacher, I've had to really rein in my own communication, my own tongue, because when I say certain things in a way that's very millennial-esque, because that's what I am, and I'm communicating with Gen Zs, it's a totally, they're not processing the information in the same way that I'm saying it, and I'm not processing what they're saying in the way that they think they're saying it. So I do think even some of these generational differences is a huge deal in communication. And so with them, I know for me, with my older students, I simplify my language, because a lot of words, there are some words that they're just not familiar with. Like the other day in class, I ran into a word where they didn't know what culminate meant. And culminate obviously means to take something to its highest point, or to end something, like your studies have culminated in a master's degree or something like that. That's not something that they were familiar with. So I had to actually help them not just define the word, but put that word into language that they use to express what they want to be able to say. And then, of course, it's all going to come full circle, where they're eventually going to get to the point where they can use the word culminate, or any other word for that matter, in their everyday speech patterns, because that's ultimately what I want them to be able to do. I want them to be able to use language and not be confused by it. Another suggestion that I wanted to get your input on was for older learners. I loved the suggestion that you had about, as opposed to saying like, how was your day? Good, right? Fine. Instead of saying something like that, the question, what did you enjoy about your day? I love that. I also want to know, how do you feel about the question, what did you observe today? When if you were, if we were working on something and I called you and I said, hey, Jeaneen, I just called you up to see how you were doing, checking in and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just curious, as you went through your day today, what did you observe today? How does that land for you?
That seems like a great potential question, but I think being more specific about what area that you observed, right? So you would say, for kids, if you're like, oh, what did you observe? I don't know. I saw the sky was blue, whatever it is. So what did you observe in science today? Or what did you observe when you in homeroom? So I think asking that question is great, but kind of narrowing down what they are
The focus.
trying to pull that, yeah, what to try and pull that focus from. What are they observing, like what part of their day? Because I think if you kind of have this broad, like, what did you observe today? They could have observed anything. And so they, uh, oftentimes, if you ask a very broad, generic question, then a lot of kids these days will say, I don't know. Even though they have so many things that they could pull from, it's easier to kind of like escape from that by saying, I don't know. I have a lot of younger, school age and adolescent kids, younger than me, but like they are able to escape from the question if they just say, I don't know, I don't know. So if you think you ask something very more specific about like what part of their day, I think you get a better answer.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I really appreciate it. And I agree with you that sometimes narrowing that focus can elicit a better quality response as opposed to just asking a hugely broad question, depending on the person and the situation, of course. I definitely agree. So, can you walk us through what you have here, where you're basically saying don't eliminate every communication problem before the child experiences it, and you have four different scenarios here?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the little kids, right? Sometimes they bring their water bottle to school or they might have juice cups at school. And by filling up their bottle or cup or whatever before the kid is able to realize, oh, it's empty, I need more water, right? That's meeting their need before they are able to practice that communication, right? So you also want to meet the child where they're at, right? So if the child's not able to communicate what they might need or want, you might not expect them to say, oh, more water, please, or I'm out of water. But you might shake it and be like, oh, what's going on? Oh, there's no water. We can ask for more water. So you kind of meet the child where they're at. So a lot of preschool kids, when they're empty, when their bottle's empty, they're able to hopefully ask for more water, right? So you don't want to just refill their waters beforehand. As teachers, you want to be able to obviously know when the child might need or want or something, but it should create the opportunity and sabotage, right? We say practice. You're not going to be able to practice language if you are filling that cup or giving them more snack before they're able to request. So a lot of times the kids will have Cheerios for snack, and then before they're even done with those Cheerios, the teachers are giving them more Cheerios. So that opportunity, that request is done. So I always tell the teachers, wait for the child to indicate they might need or want something and to have that communication there. The problem solving, I can't find my homework, or I don't know where my favorite toy is, or whatever, right? So instead of saying like, oh, what do you need help with? Whatever, what's going, what are you trying to find? And try to problem solve for them, you can observe them, say, oh, what's going on? Like, you look troubled. What are you trying to do? You can ask them so they can work on, oh, I can't find such and such, rather than you investigating too much before the child's able to have that opportunity to advocate for themselves, right? Asking for clarification. I don't understand the assignment. I'm sure you get this a lot in your class. You have high schoolers. Yeah. So
Just a
you have
little.
this just a little bit, right? So you want them to be able to realize that they don't have all the information or they have a question and then they can ask for clarification themselves rather than provide too much assistance and kind of, like you said, spoon feed them all of the different steps that they need to do. Like my son, even though he's in general education, he does have a one-on-one because he has seizures and he does have academic needs as well. And so for his one-on-one, which is an adult support person, I always have them, make sure you aren't giving him, don't do the work for him, right? You want to be able to let him kind of figure it out. And when he has a problem, then ask for help then. So you don't want to do too much, right? Um, and also the last one is self-advocacy. So I need to talk to my teacher or I need to talk to an adult, right? If I need help, you know, this child is bullying me. I need to talk to an adult to help me with that. Or if the child is younger, right? Like so and so pushed me, I'm going to tell the teacher. Being able to have that opportunity to find that adult in the classroom to voice what's happening rather than push the other child back, right? So you want to be able to use your words, tell the other child, don't push me, and then go find that teacher to say, like, tattletale in a sense, right? So you want to be able to self-advocate for yourself. And as they get older, more elementary to high school age, you want them to be able to have that opportunity to practice talking with their teachers or adults in the schools or adults in their community on how to, self-advocate for themselves, ask for clarification, volunteer, their opportunity to step up as either the leader of something. And I think once you are able to create these opportunities for the child to practice their language, they are then able to have more confidence and self-esteem as they're communicating with, throughout their day.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice, and I appreciate the elevation there, particularly the one about the the looking for something instead of going into investigator mode and saying, what are you looking for? I really appreciated the one where you're like, oh, you look a little puzzled or you look troubled, where you're not making assumptions and giving them all the language. You're making a statement that is broad enough for them to be able to respond to in their own unique way, as opposed to pushing them in a specific direction with words that we don't intentionally mean to do. Because I know in my case, if a kid was digging through their backpack in class, for sure I would have said, what are you looking for? But now I'm going to rethink that and start looking for more opportunities for them to be able to express themselves. And I think that's a really good advice that I'm definitely going to take to my own classroom. So here you talk about don't fear the struggle. A lot of parents, I can imagine, especially ones that really, really care about their kids, it's sometimes not very comfortable to have to watch their child sort of navigate the language production process because we just want to get in there and immediately solve those needs. Can you kind of help us figure out ways to harmonize our love for our children or our students, but also the opportunities that we have to build stronger, better, more capable, and more confident communicators? Because sometimes these things, I feel like they're at odds at times.
Absolutely. So this goes hand in hand with a chapter in my book called uh, "No Child's Ever Died of Crying," as far as we know, right? So it's like that fear of the child being uncomfortable, the child crying because you want to soothe that cry. You don't want them to cry. You want to meet their needs so they don't cry. They don't have any struggle in life. And by doing that, you're anticipating too much, you're doing too much, and you're meeting that child where before they have this ability to grow, right? There's a space to grow in discomfort. There's a space to grow and struggle. Because when you are learning how to do a task or you're learning how to do something like speak a sentence or ask for your own thing, you have this space where you are a little bit uncomfortable because it's something new, but you need to be able to try it out and do it over and over until you get better at it, right? So if you have a child who is like learning how to walk, right? And every time the child falls, the parent would pick them up, so you don't want them to fall. But if you keep doing that, they're never going to learn how to walk, right? So, and also if a parent is speaking for the child, or if the older siblings are speaking for the child because they know what the child might need or want, they're saying with the child, oh, they mean this, even though the child hasn't even spoken yet. By doing that, you're telling the child who's learning that they don't really have to speak, right? They've learned this learned helplessness. And so by doing that, you're not letting them grow, And by not letting them grow, they're going to be stunted in a way, right? If you never let a child fall, they're never going to learn to walk. And if you don't let a child learn to speak, then they learn that, well, someone else is going to say something for me, so I don't really need to do it. So a lot of times children will cry, right? And I always tell parents that sometimes children will cry because they know that you will give in. Because, if a child wants a certain toy and they start crying, so you just give them the toy, or you just give them the candy or the food or whatever it is. But if you really allow that child to have a little bit of discomfort, to stretch their abilities, is what I call it, stretch their abilities to request or indicate, then you kind of meet them where they're at rather than put a band-aid on what they're, not able to master yet. You want them to stretch the ability, meet them where they're at rather than stunt the ability and then pacify that discomfort, that crying, because without the discomfort, they're not going to grow. That makes sense.
It does. It definitely does. And we just have to get, if we want them to be resilient, what I'm hearing you say is that if we want them to be resilient through this process, then we too have to exhibit that same resilience through the adult version of this process. Because we can't expect resilient, communicative, competent kids if we are also not resilient through this process and we just give in every single time they're crying or show signs of struggle. We're not displaying resilience, or confidence or even competence at that point. We're just giving in. So I think it's a great concept of not fearing that struggle and understanding that they're going through their own process of resilience and struggle, and that we are doing the exact same thing, but we're going to get to a point where we're both going to cross that finish line, and we're going to be better communicators for it and have a better
Yeah,
connection and relationship.
absolutely. So, like one example I want to give for older kids is that, when we go to a restaurant, say, okay, you're going to order your own food. And a lot of times kids will be like, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to talk to the waiter. I don't want to do it. And they get so uncomfortable by it. But if you do not allow them to practice it, they're never going to be able to do it. It's not going to be overnight. They're going to be able to say, I want a cheeseburger with French fries and a chocolate shake. You know, they might be like, oh, I want and it's okay for them to not be perfect because it is practice. But it is important for them to try, right? And so, like my godson would not order his own food for the longest time, and my son, I'd be like, okay, you're gonna order it. He's like, no, you do it. I'm like, nope, you're gonna do it. No, you do it, Mom. I'm like, nope, if you don't order it, you're not gonna have it. And then he's with practice and encouragement, then he's able to get over that hump of like, oh, I feel uncomfortable, but now he can do it without the hesitation, without feeling like he's going to make a mistake. And I tell him it's okay to make a mistake. It's just the importance is trying.
Yeah, oof, that's really beautiful. A beautiful experience. I can imagine being at the restaurant and then he tries and he gets all this encouragement from his family, maybe even the waiter as well. Like, hey, I could imagine that would be an incredible feel good moment for him and an incredible boost of confidence. So I think that's awesome. So now we've got the communication pause. This is something that I think was really interesting and it can feel kind of awkward. I was testing this on myself the other day. I think you had like a 5 second rule or something along those lines. Can you walk us through what this could look like in real life?
Absolutely. So especially for the little kids, right? So you want to fill the space. You want to fill the silence, but actually pausing when you're having a communication exchange with a child is very important because it is allowing them to process what is happening visually, auditorily, physically, and then letting them process how to communicate back, whether it is through signs, whether it is through words, right? Oftentimes, as parents and educators, we will finish children's sentences, right? And that's really not what we should be doing to encourage communication, because a lot of times kids will just feel like, okay, well, the adult's just going to finish my sentence for me, right? And sometimes it's so much easier because the child is thinking and they're saying like, oh, well, I think that, and oh, then you finish their sentence. And that is cutting off their communication. So by pausing, observing, and then letting the child communicate, you're going to encourage their practice. You're going to encourage their conversation with you. And then they're going to feel that there is this space where they can think and they can process before they have to verbally communicate. And even myself, sometimes when we are out, in our day, I might be talking to Che, my son, and I might ask him a question, and I'm not really sure if he's listening or if he's processing. And I might wait, and sometimes he needs longer than 5 seconds, right? And so I'll ask him the question again. He goes, Mom, I was thinking. It's like,
Mm,
oh, okay. So him learning to advocate for himself and say like, well, I heard you, but I was thinking about it. Then he can then have a little bit more time to process that, right? And then we practice like, okay, well, if you're going to take a little bit longer to think, you should tell the person that you're talking with, like, give me a minute, or I'm still processing, rather than just being silent in a sense. And so for him, if he can, I told acknowledging that you heard the question or heard a comment, that's important. And then the person that you're communicating with will be more comfortable with increasing that length of silence, if that makes
mhm.
sense.
It does. It's something I have to work on as a teacher. I fully know I have to get better at the pause. I love it. So you have here questions that essentially grow with the child. Can you? We do have the high school on the next slide as well. Can you just explain to us a little bit about how the evolution of these questions, how it changes as the kid ages, but also why this type of question is appropriate for this age group?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you want is a very concrete thing, right? So, they might want a snack or a toy. Oftentimes, for little preschoolers, if they're not able to communicate well, I might hold up a couple things. I might go, oh, what do you want? Do you want the book or the puzzle? Or do you want the car or the bear? Right? Or I might say, what do you want? Point to me, point it out, like show me. So they can learn how to communicate that way, right? And then for elementary school kids, what happens, because they can learn, by then they would learn sequences, right? So what happened first, next, last? Or oh, you have a cut on your knee, what happened? Right? So a preschooler would not understand that a lot of times. They might just be like, ow. It's like, oh, what happened? And you can kind of deduct what happened for them. Elementary school, they'll be able to understand that there was a cause and effect, right? What happened in the story. They're learning sequences. In middle school, you're having a little bit more open-ended, like, what do you think? Because they're gaining this point of view about from themselves, from other people. And then in high school, um, what do you need from me? So that could be like a more specific question. It becomes more sophisticated, as you say here, that they have more vocabulary about what they might need rather than just having like, oh, what happened here? What's going on? Right? Does that make sense?
It does. It really does. Thank you for explaining that because I didn't immediately associate the what do you want question with something concrete. That wasn't
Mhm.
it wasn't something concrete in my mind because I've been asked that question as an adult, what do you want? And all of a sudden it's kind of like I don't know. I don't know what I want. You know what I mean? What do I want out of life or this or that? And it didn't
I
feel, yeah, it didn't, as an adult, it felt far less concrete when that question was on the slide. And I was like, why would I ask a preschool kid that question? Because to me, it felt very different. But I totally get what you're saying, that what do you want is a concrete question, especially if it's paired with do you want the apple or the orange? That to me makes much more sense. So I appreciate you explaining that process. So now you talk about how adults are fast. I know that I'm a fast communicator. I have to do better at my pausing and all of that. But can you kind of walk us through what you mean by this information specifically? We ask, we repeat, we give a hint, we give another hint, and then we end up answering for them. I'm sure that every parent to some degree, even myself as a teacher, can relate to this. So can you walk us through what this means?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times for parents, adults in general, we process things faster, right? We have better language. We have the ability to problem solve quicker, right? So we might ask a child a question. If they don't answer right away, we might ask them again, and then we might give a hint, give another hint, and then answer for them. When in actuality, we can, give a hint. We can uh, maybe give another hint, and then uh, maybe provide something to give them a contextual clue, right? So when we ask a question, so I might say, so bringing this down to actually what we should be doing, when I say like, oh, what is this animal? It could be a sheep, right? Like, oh, what is this animal? And then I say, oh, it says ba. Oh, this animal lives on a farm. It says ba ba and lives on a farm. And then if they still don't know, then you provide, this is a sheep. The sheep says ba ba. It lives on a farm. What is this? It's and then you hopefully they'll say sheep. But if they are not verbal enough, then you would say like this is a sheep. Ba ba. Like so you would give them that example. So this is a communication thing where we can provide the hints, and then if they need to, we can answer for them or model for them what the actual answer is. But oftentimes as adults, when we just have interactions with kids or teenagers, we'll have this communication, and then we're providing the answer before we are able to scaffold these hints, right? We are giving the answer before we're giving them time to process what the answer could be.
Exactly. Very good. So we have the 5 second challenge, which I believe is sort of connected to the pause, the
Yes,
communication pause. So can you just, I know your son, when you said your son was advocating for himself when he said, Mom, I'm just thinking. So is that connected to this 5 second challenge that we can start to incorporate?
absolutely. So we have this 5 second challenge of letting the child process, right? So we might ask the child a question and then we expect the answer right away, right? But in actuality, we need to give them time to process it, to think about what was said, to find the words, organize their thoughts, and then respond, right? So if I ask you a question, be like, oh, like, what do you think about global warming or whatever? What do you think, ask some kind of question where you need to think, an adult needs to think, then I'm not going to expect you to answer right away, right? So if I ask a child a question, I said like, oh, what did you see at the farm today? Right? It could be a simple question like that if they went on a field trip to the farm, like, what did you see at the farm today? And then, like some people will be like, oh, did you see a duck? Did you see a cow? Did you see a sheep?
Hmm.
They're like, oh, let the child process, give them that 5 seconds to be like, oh, at the farm today. And then they need to visualize, like, what did they see? Right? What did they experience? And then they can find those words to articulate what that answer is. But when you ask a question and then you step in too soon, you're actually cutting that child off from this process that they need to go through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My grandma does something very similar where she'll pepper you with questions. Did you go to school today? Did you wear these pants to school? Did you style your hair like this? Did you do that? And it's just peppering, and then all of a sudden I just kind of get tired of the those questions. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and it goes back to that question you asked earlier about what did you enjoy today? And I would much rather her call and say, hey, I just wanted to check in, see how you were doing. What did you most enjoy about the first day of school today? as opposed to all like 50 questions of yes, no, peppering, and all that kind of stuff. I think it could be really helpful. I might actually have to say something to her, but if not, that's okay. But anyway, so you talk about making communication fun, how, the silence is not an emergency, and all of that. And so I'm just wondering, we've got this amazing and elaborate information display here, and I just want to make sure that we touch on each of these points so that it's clear what a silly mistake might look like. What do we, how do we respond to an unexpected statement, because those things do happen quite often. And then how do we respond to a playful misunderstanding, or can we make a misunderstanding playful rather than it turning into an issue or a problem? And then also, what does this look like at the various levels once again?
Absolutely. So making communication fun, there's a chapter in my book that's called That's Absurd, right? So oftentimes kids, they love to be smarter than us adults, right? So they want to be smarter than us, and by being saying something that's absurd, like if I say, "Oh, does a dog say ba ba?" And then kids will look at me like, "No," right? And if you ask the older kid, like, "Oh, so like, like a high schooler, if you say like, "Oh, so you're saying that homework should be illegal?" And they're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense, right? Or in elementary, does a dog have six legs? So you want to say something that would be provocative in a sense, right? They're thinking like, oh, wait, that doesn't sound right. That's not correct. So you want to say silly mistakes or unusual statements, playful misunderstandings. Like sometimes, we will say the wrong word in a sentence, right? So like like my son will say some vocabulary word that's very large, but he'll say it in the wrong way. And I'm like, oh, so you're saying that, um, and I'll say it as literally as possible, with the vocabulary that he is using. And he'll be like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. I'm like, oh, okay. So you are, so you meant to say that this and that. Um, you want to be able to have communication be fun and use, I always say, like, be animated and have this intonation that is making the sound of the communication fun as well. Because when you are learning things that are fun, you're going to understand it better.
Mm.
And then when you are having, you know, building rapport with children, having absurd communication with them is really quite helpful in rapport. So, like when I was working with a child, her mom said, "Oh, they went to the zoo today." I go, "Oh, they went to the zoo," and I said, "What did you see at the zoo?" She goes, "No, I don't want to talk." I go, "Oh, you went to the zoo. Oh, you must have seen a buffalo." She was like, "No, giraffe." Like, "Oh, you saw a giraffe? Oh, okay. Oh, so you went to the zoo. You must have seen a shark." Like, "No, I saw an elephant." So that's like it pulled her out of her shyness or her unwillingness to communicate just freely, right? You wanted to build this rapport. And so a lot of times by having these absurd communication exchanges with kids, you're able to build that rapport, having them have them be more playful, having them kind of let their guard down in a sense, and then you're able to just have them have more fun, I think.
Yeah, I love that. I had interpreted this information as something totally different than what you explained it to be, and that's my fault. I love the fact that you're saying this is actually intentional. This is intentional. This is not something that we're reacting to. This is something that we are intentionally embedding into our communication to build relationships and to build rapport and to make learning and communication fun and exciting for the kids and to also grab their attention. It's like, wait a second, you
Yeah.
didn't see a megalodon at the zoo? you know, like,
Yeah.
or whatever. Go ahead.
Yeah. And even like when I would, get my son ready, dressed when he was little, I'm like, okay, let's get dressed. And even though he couldn't even really speak yet, I said, let's get dressed. And I would put his shorts on my head. And he would look at me like, that's so stupid. What are you doing? Like, oh, the shorts don't go on my head, the shorts go on my arm. So I would say other absurd things as communication. And so he can kind of figure out like, oh, my mom's being silly and fun, but also we're working on vocabulary, right? Oh, the shorts don't go on my head, they go on my legs, or the hat doesn't go on my foot, it goes on my head. And so working on different vocabulary, I think is helpful when you're being silly as well.
Mm, yeah, I think that's fun. I might have to try that with my Spanish classes and just bring different items, a scarf, a hat, and ask them questions. Well, how do I put this on? Where does this go? And let them sort of
Yeah, abs
learn, yeah, the body language and the clothes and all that kind of stuff in a fun way. That would be a lot of fun.
yeah, it can actually help with like body parts, right? So you
Hmm.
can, my Spanish is not good, but you can say like, "Oh, does the shirt go on my foot?" But in Spanish, right? And they can learn different vocabulary that way as well.
Yeah. Well, on this slide, I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory for anybody who's looking at it. Preschool, help me. Elementary school, I don't understand. Middle school, that's not what I meant. High school, I disagree, and here's why. That's definitely something that they're expected to do at that level for sure. Writing persuasive essays and such. And then adulthood, hopefully they can speak for themselves, which I think is the ultimate goal. But here at the bottom, you say sometimes we need to step back so that they can step forward. What does that mean? And does it also does this statement about stepping back also apply to them too, in the sense that depending on where we're at with our child or student, sometimes do they need to take a step or two backwards before they can move forwards as well? Does that apply to this particular situation?
For this one, I wasn't intending that. I was saying that kind of like that play dumb. We need to step back and not, you know, hold their hand throughout the whole thing
Mm-hmm.
because they don't learn the independence. So by teaching the skill, and then we step back as the adults so that let the child practice and get mastery with that skill, then they can then move forward. But if we're spoon feeding or hand holding them throughout their whole process of language, then we're actually impeding their independence with language.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Well, I love this. This has been an amazing seminar. So I know, Jessica, I want to just give you an opportunity. If you're able to turn on your camera, you absolutely can do that. You can also keep it shut off. And if you want to type in a question in the chat as well, I know that Jeaneen is more than happy to answer any particular questions that you have about communication and language and all of that. So if you do have any questions, feel free to just unmic or post your question in the chat. We'll be here for another minute or two. And then Jeaneen, we will close out. But as Jessica, I want to give her a moment to process, apply the communication pause, and let her think maybe of a potential question that she has. But I also want to give you the opportunity, as she's doing that, to give us any closing thoughts for today, because I'm going to post this webinar everywhere, including in principal Facebook groups and on my podcast, everywhere, because I feel like people really, really could benefit from this information.
Amazing. It's been a great session here today. And Nikki, you asked such great questions.
Thank you.
And you're able to absorb like what I'm saying and what the slides are saying and really just, absorb it and ask great questions, make great comments. Um, I think that the idea of play, dumb, and sabotage can be utilized. I intended it to be early language development, but we really can apply it to, all different stages of development, early language, elementary, high school, adulthood. I remember doing an interview with someone and they were saying like, oh, you could really use this in business, in sales, and everything like that. So you don't want to handhold everybody across their experiences in life. You want to be able to teach them, you want to be able to step back, and you want to be able to have them gain that confidence in order to communicate whatever they would like to communicate wherever they are.
I had not even thought about that. The business world, too. That's so true. I really have to apply this information in my life. I'm going to start today, play dumb and sabotage, see how things go, and I will definitely report back to you on my observations. You can ask me the question, what did you observe with Play Dumb and Sabotage? And I'll be like, oh, this and this and this. And I think it would be a super, super fun exploration for me as a teacher and just as someone who, uh, for me, I've always been pretty, especially in my adult years, I've been more self assured. And so that can be good in many ways, but it can also not be great as well because when you're self assured, sometimes you assume too much about other people and you think you know, but you don't know. And I have to do a better job of assuming less and getting into that role of playing dumb, not in a condescending way, but in sort of the way that we were interacting in this session when I would ask you about the statement at the bottom of the slide. Oh, does it mean this too? And then you're able to clarify your original meaning and intention behind the phrase of taking a step back and all of those things. So I think I just kind of internalized it there for a second now that I reflect back on it. And now I can go and try to apply this in the real world setting. I know I'm going to mess up though. I know there's going to be some mistakes and people are going to be looking at me kind of sideways. So, but
But
it's okay.
yeah, but I think also when you interpret that statement as the person stepping back and then being able to move forward, I think you can take that as like a personal development statement for life, right? We aren't always going to just move forward.
Yeah.
We're always going to have some mistake, and then we're going to learn from those mistakes, and then we can move forward. But the intention of that slide was to be able to, teach the child or the person and like, when I worked in restaurants, we had this thing called train the trainer or
Hmm.
train the train, something where you teach a skill in the restaurant to the new person.
Hmm.
And then that person, so I teach it, I do it, and then that person teaches it to me, they do it, and then we talk about it, right? So we learn to understand it, then do it, and then be able to teach somebody else. And so when we're teaching kids or people in general, we want to be able to teach them the skill. They want them to be able to do it. And then we need to step back as a teacher, but also as a person learning the skill, we have to understand that we aren't perfect and we will make mistakes. So we will need to maybe have a step back and then in order to see what we did wrong or what we need to correct and then be able to progress further.
Yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, wonderful. So, Jessica, I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. We appreciate you so much for being here. Jeaneen, thank you again for this amazing seminar. And we'll continue this amazing partnership together in many other ways, I'm sure, in the future. Guys, if you would like to grab Play Dumb and Sabotage, it was as easy as going to Amazon and typing in the title, and it pops right on up. So, thank you, Jeaneen, so much. We'll see you on the next one, and have a blessed rest of your day.
Amazing. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Have a good one.